He ran. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. Rain poured down, soaking through his coat, but he barely noticed. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. All that mattered was moving, escaping the weight of years where nobody had seen him, where nobody had ever listened. Tonight, he was done waiting. Tonight, he would finally make them notice. For years, Daniel had been invisible, not because he was quiet or unremarkable, but because the world had refused to see him. Every idea, every small spark of brilliance was brushed aside. In school, he raised his hand and waited, only to have the teacher move on without a glance. In college, he stayed up nights crafting projects that went unnoticed, lost in a sea of louder voices. At work, his suggestions were politely ignored, his emails left unread, his presence barely acknowledged. People smiled, nodded, congratulated each other, while he sat quietly, hoping someone might finally see what he had to offer. He remembered a day in high school, standing in front of the class with his idea ready, his notes trembling in his hands. The teacher barely looked at him, and another student got praise for the exact same idea he had first shared. He had laughed it off then, pretending it didn't matter, but deep inside, the sting lingered. He learned early that the world did not reward effort. It ignored it, and yet he kept trying. He could not stop. As an adult, the pattern repeated. At his first job, he stayed late to prepare a presentation that he believed could change the way the company worked. On the day of the meeting, his boss nodded politely, smiled, and turned the discussion to someone else. Emails with his proposals went unanswered. Calls left on voicemail remained unreturned. Every attempt to shine ended in silence. The world seemed determined to overlook him. But Daniel had a fire inside him. Every rejection, every dismissal, only fueled him. He worked late nights, alone in his small apartment, surrounded by sketches, notes, and half-finished projects. He poured everything into his work, every ounce of energy, every ounce of hope, believing that one day someone would notice. He refused to let the world define his value. Even when he doubted himself, he never stopped trying. He remembered sitting in a cafe one evening, watching people laugh, celebrating small victories, and felt a familiar pang of envy. He longed to be seen, to be recognized, but he refused to let that envy become bitterness. Instead, he channeled it into determination. He whispered to himself, "They might not see me now, but one day they will. I will make sure they do." Nights were the hardest. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all this effort was in vain. He thought about giving up, about fading into the background where nobody would notice if he disappeared. But every time that thought came, he reminded himself that the only person who had to believe in him was himself. That thought alone was enough to push him forward. He began to work with a new intensity. Each day became a battle, each night a test of endurance. He refined his ideas, polished his skills, and refused to let failure define him. He submitted proposals he had spent months perfecting, entered competitions no one expected him to win, and shared his work with a world that had shown no interest. Each attempt brought disappointment, yes, but also a subtle strengthening of resolve. He began to understand something important. Recognition was not the goal. Persistence was. Months turned into years. Daniel faced setback after setback. Letters of rejection stacked on his desk. Social media posts went unnoticed. Projects failed before they even had a chance. Friends and colleagues often laughed or dismissed him. "Maybe it's just how he is," they'd say. "He's quiet. He doesn't stand out. Quiet. Invisible." Those words stung, but he refused to accept them as truth. He had ideas, talent, and determination. That was enough. Some nights, he would sit alone, staring at his reflection in the dark window, wondering if he was wasting his life. The world didn't care. Nobody was listening. Nobody would ever notice. And yet, he felt a quiet voice inside him insisting that he continue, that one day, the silence would break. That one day, all the years of being ignored would culminate in a moment that could not be overlooked. Daniel poured himself into every task with relentless focus. His hands shook as he wrote notes, sketched designs, and tested ideas. He crumpled pages, erased lines, and started over again and again. Each failure was a step toward improvement. Each mistake was a lesson. The world might have ignored him before, but he would not ignore himself. He thought about all the moments he had been overlooked, the awards that went to others, the promotions that skipped him, the opportunities he had been denied. Instead of bitterness, he collected those memories like fuel. Every dismissal became a reason to push harder, every polite brush-off a reason to prove the world wrong. He told himself, "This time, it'll be different. I will not be ignored again." Late one night, after weeks of preparation, he finally reached the point he had been working toward. His proposal, his idea, his creation, it was ready. He stared at it for a long time, unsure if it would succeed, unsure if anyone would notice. But he had done everything he could. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling, and sent it out. A simple click, a single action, carrying years of unseen effort. For a moment, nothing happened. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your heart pound even faster. And then, a faint notification. Someone had opened it. Someone had responded. And just like that, the world began to turn its eyes toward him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt it. The quiet recognition of potential, the tiny glimmer that what he had done mattered. Even as he sat there, heart racing, he realized that it wasn't just the recognition that mattered. It was the act of persistence, the refusal to give up, the decision to keep going even when no one believed. All those nights alone, all those failed attempts, had brought him here. He understood finally that the journey itself had shaped him into someone the world could not ignore. And in that quiet apartment, as the rain continued to fall outside, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He had survived years of invisibility. He had endured rejection, dismissal, and doubt. And now, the first ripple of change had begun. The world that had ignored him for so long was starting to notice. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The fire that had burned quietly within him for so long was beginning to shine. He would not stop. He could not stop. Every setback, every silent moment of despair had prepared him for this. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to feel hope. Real hope. Hope that the next chapter of his life would be different. Hope that the world would finally see what he had always known. He was more than invisible. He was unstoppable. Daniel woke the next morning with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The proposal he had sent late last night still sat in the digital ether, unseen by anyone, or so he thought. His chest tightened. Every second felt heavy. Every moment stretched into an eternity. Years of being ignored had trained him to expect nothing, yet a small, stubborn part of him dared to hope. He opened his inbox. One new message. His eyes widened. His hands shook as he clicked it. It was brief, almost casual. Someone had read his submission. That was all. But it was enough. Enough to make his heart race. Enough to make him believe that the world had finally started to see him. Weeks passed, and slowly, recognition began to trickle in. First, an email from someone in his field expressing genuine interest. Then another, asking for clarification, suggestions, his insights. Each response felt like a small victory, a drop of light in a sea of darkness he'd endured for so long. Daniel's pulse quickened every time he heard the ping of his inbox. Every reply was proof that he was no longer invisible. He remembered the first time someone actually praised his work. A simple, one-line message. "Your idea is brilliant. We've never seen anything like it." It was short, almost casual, but to Daniel, it was monumental. He read it over and over, letting the words sink in. He allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was finally being seen. But recognition, as he had learned, did not come all at once. There were still doubts, still setbacks. One colleague dismissed him again, claiming his methods were unorthodox. Another competition rejected him outright, leaving him stunned and disappointed. Yet, unlike before, these setbacks no longer crushed him. They were merely obstacles, challenges he was determined to overcome. Every no now fueled his drive instead of dampening it. Late at night, he would sit at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, thinking through every possibility. He revised, refined, and reworked his ideas tirelessly. Sleep was scarce, meals were brief, and the world outside his apartment continued, unaware of the quiet storm of effort inside. And yet, he persisted. Every moment, every action was a declaration: I will not be ignored. Then came the turning point. A meeting he had waited for years, one he had almost given up on, arrived unexpectedly. A prominent figure in his field had taken notice and wanted to see his work in person. Daniel's heart raced, his thoughts spinning. He had prepared for this moment for years, yet the reality of it filled him with anxiety. Could he convey everything he had worked for? Could he make them understand the depth of his vision? He arrived early, rehearsing his words under his breath, pacing nervously. When the meeting began, he spoke with a clarity and passion that surprised even him. The skepticism he expected melted away as eyes widened, brows lifted, and nods of understanding began to appear. For the first time, he felt the weight of invisibility lifting. They were seeing him, not just his work, but him. Afterward, messages and calls started coming faster. Invitations to speak, requests for collaboration, inquiries about his methods. The world that had ignored him for years suddenly seemed to have realized he existed. It was dizzying, almost surreal. Daniel laughed quietly to himself, a release of years of tension and longing. He had waited for this moment, and now it was here. And yet, he knew that true recognition wasn't just about others noticing. It was about the journey he had endured to reach this point. He thought of every rejection, every lonely night, every time he had doubted himself but pushed forward anyway. Those moments were no longer burdens. They were proof that he could endure, proof that persistence mattered more than approval. With each new email, each new opportunity, his confidence grew. Daniel began to understand the power of consistency and resilience. The people who had overlooked him for so long were now eager to learn from him, to work with him, to celebrate his achievements. The tables had turned. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was unstoppable. But success, as he had learned, carried its own challenges. Daniel felt a new pressure, the weight of expectation. The same intensity that had fueled him during obscurity now demanded excellence, not just persistence. He had to rise to meet it. The stakes were higher, and every decision mattered. Yet, unlike before, he welcomed the challenge. He had been prepared unknowingly his entire life for this very moment. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's work began to reach a wider audience. His ideas spread, not just locally but globally. Articles featured his accomplishments. Online communities shared his insights. People who had once laughed at him now sought his advice, quoting him, referencing him, celebrating him. And Daniel, who had spent years in the shadows, finally felt the weight of his worth. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Sitting quietly in his apartment, he looked at the piles of old rejection letters, the notes from failed projects, the sketches that never reached completion. And he smiled. Those were the bricks of his foundation. Each no had been a step, each ignored attempt a lesson. Without them, he would not have been ready for this moment. Daniel began to mentor others quietly. He reached out to people who reminded him of his younger self, those overlooked, dismissed, uncertain of their value. He shared his story, his methods, his struggles, and his triumphs. He reminded them that persistence, self-belief, and resilience could overcome even the heaviest silence. Every message he sent, every conversation he had, became part of the ripple effect of the change he had created. One evening, he received a message that would forever mark his journey. A young professional wrote to him, trembling with excitement, saying, "I've been ignored for years, but seeing your story, it gives me hope. Thank you for showing me that persistence matters." Daniel read it slowly, letting the words settle. And in that quiet moment, he understood something profound. Recognition was not just about being seen. It was about inspiring others to persevere as well. The flood of acknowledgement and opportunity continued. Daniel's work was being featured in conferences, magazines, and online forums. People who had once dismissed him now invited him to speak, collaborate, and lead. And yet, he remained grounded. He knew the climb had been as important as the summit. The years of invisibility had taught him patience, discipline, and humility, qualities that ensured he would not be consumed by sudden recognition. And in the midst of this whirlwind, Daniel still remembered the quiet nights, the empty rooms, the moments when the world turned its back. He held those memories close, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. They were proof of his strength, markers of his journey, and reminders of how far he had come. Daniel began mentoring formally, hosting workshops, speaking at schools, and sharing his story widely. He emphasized that being overlooked is not a reflection of one's value. It is often a reflection of timing, perception, or circumstance. And most importantly, he stressed, giving up is never the solution. Keep creating, keep striving, and one day the world will notice. The world began to respond in ways he could never have imagined. Invitations to lead projects, keynote speeches, collaborations with prominent figures, all of it came naturally, effortlessly, because he had prepared for years in obscurity. His persistence had forged not only his ideas, but his reputation. People who once dismissed him now sought his guidance and applauded his achievements. Daniel's life had transformed completely. Even in moments of immense success, Daniel remained humble. He remembered the countless nights alone, the endless stack of rejection letters, the projects that never saw the light of day. Those moments were no longer painful. They were sacred, the foundation upon which his success had been built. Each one had strengthened him, refined him, and made him ready for the opportunities he now embraced. One day, he received an award for innovation and impact. Standing on stage, holding the recognition he had long desired, he allowed himself to reflect on the long, arduous journey that brought him here. He thought about the fear, the doubt, the loneliness, and he realized that those struggles had been his secret allies, teaching him endurance, shaping his character, and preparing him for this exact moment. Daniel took a deep breath and spoke, not just about his achievements, but about the journey. He shared with the audience the years of being ignored, the setbacks, and the persistent belief in his own worth. And he urged everyone listening, if you feel overlooked, undervalued, or invisible, remember this, keep going. Your moment is coming. Your time is now. Never give up on yourself. As the applause washed over him, he felt a profound sense of completion, not because he had finally been recognized, but because he had finally understood the power of perseverance. Recognition had been the destination, yes, but the journey itself had been the true reward. The years of struggle, the nights of doubt, the long hours of effort, those had created the person capable of seizing this moment. And even after the world had seen him, Daniel continued. He continued to work, to mentor, to create, and to inspire. He understood that visibility could be fleeting, but impact and resilience endure. He shared his story widely, encouraging others to rise above the silence, to embrace persistence, and to trust in their own value, even when the world fails to notice. Daniel's story spread like wildfire. Social media, articles, interviews. His journey resonated with countless people. Those who had once felt invisible saw in him a reflection of their own struggles and a beacon of hope. Daniel had become more than a success story. He had become a symbol of unwavering determination, proof that persistence matters more than immediate recognition. He reflected on every person who had doubted him, ignored him, or dismissed him. He did not feel anger or resentment. Instead, he felt gratitude. Those who overlooked him had given him the very thing that fueled his triumph, the drive to succeed regardless. Every dismissal, every moment of invisibility had forged his character, his resilience, and his brilliance. And so, Daniel moved forward, unstoppable, unshakable, and unafraid. He knew now that recognition was not the goal. It was the byproduct of persistence. The true measure of achievement was enduring the silence, the doubt, and the rejection, and continuing anyway. His story became a roadmap for anyone who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or overlooked. If you've ever felt invisible, remember Daniel's journey. Keep working, keep striving, and keep believing. The world may not notice at first, but your persistence is building something far greater than immediate recognition. Your moment is coming, and when it arrives, it will be worth every struggle. If Daniel's story inspired you, make sure to like this video, leave a comment sharing your own experience of perseverance, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that invisibility is temporary, but persistence is eternal. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. They need to know that being ignored doesn't mean they are invisible, and that one day their time will come. Never forget, the world will notice when you refuse to give up. Daniel's journey proves it, and yours can too. Keep pushing, keep believing, and one day, your story will be the one that inspires millions.